Welcome, everyone. This is our homesteading series all about hay this evening. We're joined tonight by Jeremy Grant. It's Tuesday evening, and he's going to walk us through some of the ins and outs of hay production. We are with the West Virginia Department of Agriculture Business Development Division, and Jeremy also works with the West Virginia Department of Ag. And he farms in addition to his work at the department, so we'll hear a little bit about that. So this is our overview. We'll wrap up with some questions. But before we get started, I just want to do a quick plug for our West Virginia Grown program. This is our premier branding program for the state. We just released a really nice print edition of our West Virginia Grown program, so check that out. There's also an online directory, listings in the market bulletin and our e-news. So if you have any questions about this free marketing program, certainly reach out to us. Also, a quick plug for our Veterans and Heroes to Agriculture program. This is a great resource for veterans and heroes that are interested in agriculture. We're currently running an Intro to Herbalism course. It's a 10-week training course. We've done one on beekeeping and maple syrup production. So there's a lot of great opportunities with our Veterans and Heroes program. And lastly, just to quickly introduce myself, I am Lacey Davidson Ferguson, one of the planning coordinators in the Business Development Division. I cover the southwest part of the state, this green territory over here that includes Lincoln, Cabell, Wayne, Mingo, McDowell, Mason, Putnam, Boone, and Kanawha counties. I have colleagues who cover the northern part, the eastern part, and the southwest part of the state, and then we tag team the areas there in black. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce and give the permission over to Jeremy to take over.
Sounds good. Do you want me to try to pull my... I'm going to go ahead and try to pull my slideshow up.
Yes, if you can do that, you should have permission back to pull your slides up.
It's working. Can you see that, Lacey?
Yep, you're up and rolling now.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. As Lacey said, I'm Jeremy Grant. Also work for the West Virginia Department of Agriculture in the Regulatory Division. I'm a produce safety coordinator, so basically that means I inspect a lot of the large produce farms around the state and get the opportunity to meet a lot of good people and travel, and definitely enjoy that part of my work. At home, when I'm not working for the department, and I have what I like to call an overgrown hobby farm. It's it seems to keep growing each year and going in different directions, but it's something I definitely enjoy, and agriculture has always been a large part of my life and definitely my passion. So this evening I was asked to talk a little bit about hay production, and what things as new beginning farmers, or even folks that have been in the game for a long time, may want to think about, look into, maybe change on their operation, and how excuse me, and how to go about that. So on the first slide here, I've got, what type of hay should I plant? And some of you all may be scratching your heads and kind of going, how is that possible? We live in West Virginia. There may be your hilly terrain. It may be too steep to actually till ground and reseed and plant hay. But there are some options. I know on my dad's home place, it's very steep, and we make some hay out there mainly just to keep from having to haul so much hay out there, and also need that production. But keeping your soils healthy with the correct pH with lime, and then also adding the appropriate amounts of fertilizer. But you can also do some frost seeding to get those clovers and things in those soils, as many of us probably have trouble with. And fescue is either kind of a love-hate relationship. It's not always the best hay in the world, but it will grow about anywhere. And sometimes we just have to be thankful that we have that. On the farm I live on here in Mason County, we're fortunate it is flat, tillable ground. Um, and here's kind of a list here. Orchard grass, I would highly recommend as just kind of a good go-to hay. It's pretty easy to keep. Fertility needs aren't that great. That would be hard or that challenging for you to grow. Alfalfa, everybody hears alfalfa and just kind of goes crazy over it. I like alfalfa, but it is, as our county extension agent says, it is the diva of the hay crops. It's hard. It's hard to grow. The fertility and soil and nutrient requirements are very, very high in comparison to other crops. And in our area, with the heat, humidity, wet ground, it's a lot of times hard to get cured and baled appropriately. Going on down, there's all types of clovers that you can mix in with your hay. I like red clover, ladina clover works really well. Plain old, white clover to get those legumes in there and putting some nitrogen back into your soil can definitely help on some of your fertilized costs as well. Timothy makes a really nice hay. It's pretty well suited for the area, especially wetter soils. Timothy does very well in here. So I know in a lot of in some of our fields, we'll go in with Timothy if it's a little too wet for orchard grass. So now if you're on a hill, you won't have that issue, but in some of the bottom ground, that may be something to take into consideration. And then I've got some down here at the bottom that you may be scratching your head. I'm not going to promote or take away from, but teff grass, I've raised some neighbors have raised some and had really good luck with it. It makes a really good high quality horse hay. It's similar to Timothy. It's a very fine stem, leafy plant and blade that dries down very well. But again, it is just an annual that you would have to replant every year. So that's something to take into consideration. Your ryegrass, annual ryegrass, and wheat I've got listed at the bottom. If you have cropland, corn, soybeans, large garden crops, you name it, go in the fall and plant those. And then you can, if you don't want to till those back into the soil, if you want to treat that as a hay crop and harvest those prior to planting again in the spring, you can do so. I've been doing some of that work the past couple years and have been very pleased. This last year I had wheat and crimson clover, and it was beautiful. I had like 25 acres of it. It turned out about 5.5, 4 to 5 rolls to the acre, which down about a roll to the acre from last year. Could have just been the cool spring, but I feel like the quality of that feed will be very good and definitely kind of gives you that boost, multi-use of your land. After that was taken off, I followed right up with soybeans behind it. So, is there any questions about the different types of hay crops that you might be interested in planting?
Yeah, I have a quick one, Jeremy. Is there one that's like more beginner friendly than another, or are they all pretty well suited for any scale of production? And then a follow-up to that are, when you're shopping for these things, are some of them going to be more expensive than others? Is there more an investment to choose one type over the other?
Sure, Lacey. And as far as like a beginner stage goes, and there's different methods to planting this grass. If you've got the equipment and can till it and have a nice seed bed, then you can either broadcast seed and cultipack. You could use a drill and drill it, or you could use a no-till drill. for the most part, orchard grass seed is not overly expensive. Alfalfa is very pricey. To give you an example, I planted 10 acres of orchard grass alfalfa, and then I like to plant what they call like a nurse crop to go with it, which I just planted oats. The oats will kind of help keep some shade to keep some weeds down, as well as actually giving you a hay crop on that first go around. Because basically, a lot of folks may plant a field of hay in the spring and go, "Oh my gosh, all I have is weeds." I think I need to do this over, but I would highly recommend just being patient, going ahead and mowing it, trying to keep the field relatively clean. But then the following spring, I think you'll be amazed to how well it does turn out. But again, orchard grass affordable, Timothy's affordable, teff, ryegrass, wheat. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I always just plant feed wheat or feed oats for nurse crops or cover crops. I don't actually buy treated seed or anything like that because I'm just wanting something there on the ground, to protect the soil as well. And I've found it works just as well. So yeah, really, any of these is, having an appropriate seed bed prior to is probably the biggest key in getting one of those crops established. Does that answer your question?
It does. That's good to know, and I think really good advice for a first timer too is to be patient. That it's maybe not your first year, but the year following where you'll really see an improvement, I guess, in
Yeah.
your field.
And we have the ability, here in our area, a lot of times if I'm just broadcast seeding, I'll actually mix the seed and fertilize together, have them do that right at the local feed store. And then I cut my fertilize rate in half. So I have to go over the field twice. So basically I go over it and then I go back and I split my tracks again to make sure I get adequate coverage. And then take a call to packer after that and run over it to kind of firm the ground and get a little better seed contact with the soil as well. And we've had good success with that. So, and again, some of these options may not be for everybody. They may want to just work with what they have and working on their soil fertility and getting it to where it needs to be to produce good hay. So I'm going to move on. Again, choosing the right hay for your needs. What do you want to do with it? Is a big thing. A lot of folks may say, "Hey, I'm going to raise hay and I'm going to sell it, and I can get all this money out of it," and that's perfectly fine. Around here, square bales seem to bring a premium. If it's in a square bale and it's alfalfa or orchard grass or Timothy. The price is pretty much whatever you want to put on it. Probably anywhere from $6 to $8, I would say. Or in our area here is not uncommon. Now, a round bale of hay, just from what I've experienced, and I've done a little bit of math on some hay this year of what I've got in it, and I've got close to $18 to $22 a roll just in fertilized cost in that hay. So when folks don't want to pay more than $30 a roll for that hay, if you take your equipment cost into it, I don't. It's kind of hard to justify or try to sell a whole lot of round hay if you're not going to be able to get $50 or $60 a roll out of it. Just my personal opinion. Around here, you can have absolute junk hay, $25 a bale. You can sell it all day long, but don't ask $50 for it. A good bale, and they won't. They don't seem to want to bite on it. So, but again, think about do you have the right storage for your hay? If you've got excess hay and it's going to be sitting outside, you're not going to need that to get you through the winter. You may be better off taking a lower price, moving some of that hay, getting rid of it, just simply so it doesn't go to waste. Do you want to wrap your hay, or do you want to have wrapped hay or dry hay? And then again, that comes with more expense, more equipment, and time wise, there's not a lot more time between wrapping hay and then versus taking the hay off the field and putting it in a barn or putting it under a tarp, something like that. But we can cover some more of that. Square bales versus round bales. I think I already gave a pretty decent explanation on that. And square bales may come down to your preference and what you're feeding and what you're able to handle. But then again, also think of, if I'm going to drop 500 square bales in the field, are you willing? Are you willing, and are you able to pick those up, or are you going to be able to get any labor? That's why the round bales are so convenient. There is a lot of I don't want to say new, there's a lot of technology out there with square bale accumulators that will, bundle them in 10 bale bundles, and you can take a grapple and pick them up, load them on a wagon or a trailer. There are stack wagons and different things that hold various numbers of bales that'll pick them up for you out of the field. But again, it's all what scale of production you want to get to. And the size of the bales you'll harvest. What size tractor do you have? Or maybe if you're buying hay, if you have a small tractor, maybe a 4x4 round bale is all you can handle instead of a 4x5, or 4x6, or there's all kinds of different sizes. So again, lots of things to think of there.
So Jeremy, quick question, and it looks like you're gonna maybe get right into this, but you touched on it briefly. Can you give just a really quick rundown of, if you're going to explain to your potential buyer, or you're thinking of this like as a business, what are all of the things that you would need to consider as far as your investments or inputs when then pricing your hay? Do you have just like a bulleted list that you could quickly run down and say, don't forget to think of this, don't forget to factor in your labor, don't forget to factor in your, string, don't forget to factor in whatever that you could share with folks?
And I guess I really don't have something to get down to the absolute, nitty gritty. And again, it's so hard on kind of a farm commodity basis on pricing stuff, because we're so used to everybody telling us, what the market is, whether it be grain, cattle, things like that. So hay gives you that option. On your farm, you're selling it direct to someone to be able to price that. So just because you've heard that everybody gets $30 or $35 a bale for their hay, or a roll of hay, I don't know. I guess I always call a round bale a bale instead of a roll, but I apologize for that. But again, today I looked at, okay, the price of fertilizer went up drastically. I looked at how much hay I was making versus how much fertilizer I'd put on, and I was right in that $18 to $22 range just in fertilizer cost. Then I've got, I was using net wrap, so there's right at $1, almost $1.25 or so a bale just in the plastic wrap that goes on it. Now you can cut those costs if you just put nylon string or something like that on them. I guess the net kind of spoils you just it's faster and they look pretty. So there's a lot of factors. Then, do you have a $20,000 tractor, or do you have an $80,000 tractor you're baling hay with? I mean, probably if you really truly figured in the cost of your equipment, you probably ought to be getting $100 a roll out of your.
Yeah, no
And that's
question.
not, and they're not gonna take on that, around here 50 is about top dollar that I've been able to charge, and don't feel like, and I mean, I feel like that's good quality hay and they're getting what they're paying for. And a lot of folks, other areas of the country, they sell hay by the ton. And it's forage tested, and I've got a slide on forage testing later on. So they know what that hay test, what the nutrient quality and protein of that hay is, and other areas they kind of get that. they know that if they go to the feed store around here, they want to buy 12% calf feed. Well, if I'm able to bale a really good bale of hay and it tests, 14%, then if you figured that weight of that hay by the ton versus that 12% calf feed by the ton, they're probably only paying a quarter of the cost with that hay, even though they're actually getting better feed quality than they are with that 12% feed, calf feed, if that makes sense. And I know that might have been getting down in the weeds.
No, you're well, definitely in the weeds, but it's okay. We're talking about hay. So, so you mentioned testing, and that's the first time I've ever heard anyone talk about testing their hay. So how do you do that? Where do you do that? Is there a service that is provided in the state for testing it, or is it just something that by looking?
Well, I guess a little bit of both. I know here in Mason County for Putnam Mason Jackson, the Western Conservation District will pay for, I think, at least a couple hay samples, at least one. I don't want to go overboard, but I know at least one hay sample a year for its cooperators in this area. And there are other labs around that you can actually take a hay sample. Now, a hay sample would be similar to like a soil sample. So it's a core sample. It's actually drilled out of the bale, so you get all layers and different profiles. You don't just grab a handful of hay and stick it in a bag. You actually have to have a little auger that will take that sample. But I know the districts and across the state, other areas, they do have those available. Your county extension agents may have those as well, or could at least guide you and get you in that right direction for doing that. I don't think the department does that. I don't know, Lacey, if you know or not.
No, that was the first I'd heard of it. We're pretty big proponents of getting your soil tested and sending those in. And but this is the first I've heard about hay. So I made a note of it there so we can be sure to add that to our resource list to share with folks. That's great.
And I do have another slide, and I'll touch on a little bit more on that later, just in some other thinking of what you may need just around the farm if you do have your hay tested. So I guess getting back on topic, equipment needed. Obviously, you kind of need a tractor. You need a mower. Mower, you have different options. You could have. I learned to use a sickle bar mower when I was on the farm there with my grandparents. Then we moved to a disc mower. Now I have a disc bind, which is a mower and then crimper conditioner. A hay tedder to fluff the hay up and to help it dry. There's all kinds of different rake options, from the bar rakes, wheel rakes, V rakes, rotary rakes, you name it. There are lots of different rake options out there to get that hay into a windrow. Then do you want to go with a round baler or a square baler? And do you want to take the next step and start making and wrapping and making some silage hay? So you need a bale wrapper. Here's a picture. The one on the left, that's a mower conditioner. So it looks just like the mower basically on the right underneath of the shield. It's a disc mower, but then it's got the rollers and crimps the hay and conditions it, it is nice for stemmier hay, your alfalfas, things like that. But definitely a big cost difference between the two implements.
So give us an idea, Jeremy, just ballpark. I mean, new versus used. What are some of the costs here?
I got all that for you.
Okay. All right, cool. I'll wait then. I'm on the edge of my seat, but I'll wait.
No, you're quite all right. So again, there's a round baler. And if you're wanting to do wrapped hay or silage hay, they make a different grade baler that is able to handle that wetter material. Because if you're wrapping it, you need so much moisture in that hay. You don't want it to be too dry, or it will not, the quality won't be there. Then on the right, that's what I call a V rake, which is basically just two wheel rakes put together. They fold out, and then it funnels all the hay as you go through the field into the center. They're very nice. They're quick. You can rake a lot of hay, especially if you're by yourself. With a rake like that, I can do 20 acres in an afternoon, rake and bale it myself pretty comfortably. There are some downfalls or downsides to the V rakes or the wheel rakes. They tend to gather everything that's on the ground, and they say that there's a fancy word for basically putting a little bit of dirt and soil into your hay. It raises some of those levels just because they rake so well. But the speed of them is definitely hard to beat. So, startup cost, Lacey, here, and I kind of pulled these numbers out of not really out of my head, but just in looking and pricing different pieces of equipment. So I've kind of got a new list, I've got a used list. On a tractor, 35,000 to 65,000 new, and I think that's being very conservative. I mean, it's easy to tip the scales at over 100,000 on a tractor anymore. But I'm thinking, for a smaller scale, just getting started, brand new tractor, that's going to be kind of the range you're looking at there, the 35 to 65. If you want to go over to the used side, maybe the 15 to $40,000 range. And then I buy new and I buy used equipment. And a lot of times the used equipment I buy is something that I would feel more comfortable working on. If you're very mechanically inclined, enjoy turning a wrench, and are pretty handy that way, then the used route is definitely a good option for you to look at. So a mower, and that could be starting out with a disc mower to a disc hay bind, 8,000 to 30,000. Just a hay tedder to fluff the hay up and kick it, 4 to 8,000. A rake, 4 to 8,000. A new round baler, probably 20 to 40,000, and a square baler is probably in the 20 to $30,000 range as well. So you can look at that. You can make the decision for what you're willing to pay, what you're able to pay, and then go from there. So I know those numbers, can definitely scare you. And I know we're all about talking about making hay and doing it yourself here, but if you've got a smaller group of animals and you don't think you can really justify this, then buying hay may be your best option. And hopefully I've imparted a little more wisdom, I guess, for you to realize the importance of knowing the quality of the hay, and then it may be worth paying a little more money and knowing that you're getting a high quality hay as well. So, Lacey, does that give you
Yeah, that's great, and maybe you're going to get into this too, but I think it's worth mentioning right here. So if you decided, you ran the numbers and you're projecting, of scaling up with your herd, and you've decided that you're going to invest in equipment, there are some resources that are specific to farmers for financing these things, right? Have you taken advantage or utilized any of the programs through like the Farm Service Agency, or maybe programs cost share through the conservation districts? Can you speak to any of those from personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think, and I would definitely encourage anyone to shop around. A lot of the dealers, if you buy new, have been offering 0% financing for so many years, and if you can get 0% financing, I think that's phenomenal. Personally, I've used the Farm Service Agency at the FSA office and was able to purchase some used equipment at a fixed interest rate for like 7 years at I think it was 1.75% interest through the Farm Service Agency. So that is a tremendous resource and option for folks, because otherwise a lot of the dealers or banks, you're going to be 5, 6, 7, 8% on used equipment. So being able to use that definitely gives you the opportunity to save a lot of money. Farm Service Agency is good to work with. I typically only make one payment a year. I have it set up at a certain time, so I know that I've either sold calves or some other crop there off the farm to know that the cash is there, and I'm not making a monthly payment. I just have to make one bigger payment once a year. So yes, there are a lot of options that way. As far as the conservation districts go, there's not really a lot there to help, as far as I know, with loans for equipment or things like that. But they will help cost share on lime and other things for your property to get those nutrient requirements up. So, is that did that answer?
Yep, that is perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping you would speak to. So thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So, just a basic timeline from when you would mow your hay to when you'd be able to bale it. Dry hay, so that's something that you're going to want to get, let's say, less than 14%, 12, 11, 10, somewhere in that range would be amazing to keep it good and dry. So the day one, you're going to mow it. Possibly, if you get it mowed early enough, you'll go right behind it with your hay tedder and fluff it out. Day two, you're going to ted that hay again. And then day three, depending upon humidity, moisture in the ground, we may ted that hay again and then be able to rake and bale it. Or we may have to wait as long as 4 days, depending upon how thick or how heavy your hay and how good of a crop you have. Now, that's basically for a grass hay. Alfalfa that I do, a lot of times I like to mow it, follow right behind the mower with the hay tedder, let it set the next morning while there's still some dew on that, since it's a very leafy plant or a legume, same as your clovers. You want to kind of try to fluff that, turn it over, ted it with the dew almost on or just barely drying while that plant's still good and tough to keep from knocking the leaves off. Because if you go out in the evening at 5 o'clock and ted it, which I know if you're working, that's just a part of it. If you try to ted those legumes at that time of day, you'll end up knocking all the leaves off, and your hay quality will greatly diminish. So that kind of leads the way into your wet hay or your silage hay. If you have a lot of clover or alfalfa, that gives you a good option of mowing it one day, then just going right behind and raking and baling the next. As long as that hay gets a good wilt on it, you want to lose some of that moisture and have it to about 50%, 60% moisture. And they do make hay testers and probes that you can test your hay with. I myself, I don't have one. But if that's an option that you want to look into or get, you could do that to test the moisture on that. So wet hay, 2 days, pretty easy. Especially if you're busy with work and you've got a Saturday and Sunday, you can still get hay made in those couple days. The right weather conditions, you could almost maybe mow that morning and again bale that evening. Quality of hay, I would recommend for our area, it would be mowing it in the morning or as early in the morning as you could, simply because after you cut that plant, the plant is still alive and metabolizing the starches in that plant. So before, excuse me, but so the quicker you can get that dry down, the quicker you can have those starches quit metabolizing in that plant, and your hay quality will stay up and maintain better hay. So I know that's kind of in depth, but any more questions on that kind of a timeline? So dry hay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So just for clarity, I know you've a little bit mentioned it before. So if you're one person, you've got like mid-range equipment. How much hay can you expect to mow and ted and rake and bale in a weekend, or like a ratio, like you can achieve so many per hour or, per acre, you should get this much yield. Maybe you're going to get into all of those numbers, but I'm just...
I really, wasn't. So that's, I think, a very good question. And a lot of times, I kind of recommend, if you've kind of got the mid-range to low-range equipment that you're not sure about, is it gonna last? What if I have a breakdown? What if I mow 30 acres of hay and within the first acre of baling I break down? What do you do? I'm very fortunate in the area I am. Got some good neighbors, and I know that if I break down, they'll come bail me out, and I'll do the same. I'll do the same for them. But a lot of folks, they like to mow a smaller patch of hay to start with at the beginning of the year. Maybe cut 5 acres, kind of knock the rust per se off the equipment, make sure everything's going to work good before they take in a larger quantity. But until you get comfortable with your equipment and your ability and how quick you can go, I would stick to the lower acreage. Myself, I mean, I like to feel like if I'm going to make hay, I want to bale about 100 rolls in an evening or afternoon. With the equipment that I have, I feel like that's pretty normal, but others may not want to go over 20 bales or something. So depending upon the quality of your hay, how thick, how good of a stand you have is going to depend on how much hay you make as well. Ideally, I'd like to shoot for 5 or 6 rolls to the acre. In reality, sometimes we only get 3 or 4. It depends, but and also it depends on the growing season as well. So a lot of it is getting familiar with your equipment, what you're capable of doing, and how long you want to stay out there, what other obligations you may end up having along the way. So I hope that clarified that a little better.
Yep. No, I think that's perfect, and that's good advice. Start small, get familiar with your equipment and your land.
Right.
And I think you hit a really important part, and I've observed this just in my experience in farming and gardening, and specifically with hay. It's great to know your neighbors, and chances are you're all going to be cutting hay and baling hay at the same time, which can be tricky, but it's good to know who has the resources that could lend a hand and like you said, be able to return the favor. So I think that's wise advice.
Absolutely. And then again, kind of moving on into, hay storage. Barns are expensive, but so is a hay wrapper. But if you look at what you have in that hay, it's awful nice to stack it inside and have it in the dry and preserved then, for as long as until you need to feed it. And then that, your waste and things like that's definitely going to be cut down. Round bale feeders, if you're putting it in something with a bottom, you don't have that waste hay that the cattle aren't going to eat. You've got to get in there with a pitchfork and fork it out, that they'll basically eat every drop. So that's why, if I can, it's not always possible, to try to keep most of the hay inside. I've used the big, large hay tarps before, and they work really well if they're somewhere where you can babysit them. But if you'd happen to get a pretty good wind event or windstorm, and that wind blows that big tarp and you don't get back to it for a few weeks and you get a lot of rain on it, hay does not keep well at all stacked outside. So if you think you're going to stack hay outside to store it and it's not going to be covered, I would highly recommend you not doing that, or you'll end up ruining more hay than you'll end up keeping. So if you are going to store it outside, I like to butt it just end to end, to kind of protect the ends a little bit, and water runs off pretty well. On the right-hand side of the picture, you can't see that real well, but that's just a big tube that's some of the wheat and crimson clover that we've done as a cover crop. hay this spring and wrapped it, and then came right back in and planted soybeans in behind it. So, but plastic now has went up quite a bit. I think it's right at $100 a roll for the plastic wrap, and you can probably get 15 or 20 round bales wrapped with one roll of plastic. So just the storage cost on that is pricey. But since that's a cover crop, I want to be able to get it off early. When we baled that, it was only in the 60s, so it definitely you weren't going to be able to get that hay dry. So wrapping's kind of the only option. I don't own that wrapper. A neighbor, again, the nice thing of having good neighbors is being able to exchange labor, exchange equipment, and I was able to borrow his tube wrapper and wrap that hay. So, questions on storage?
Just so when you're using the wrapper, is it you've already moved it out of the field and into your row and then it gets wrapped? I've never actually seen it done before, so I was just kind of curious how the wrapper.
It's a pretty cool process. There's a lot of different options. There are some really fancy balers that will go down through the field, make a bale, kick it back on the wrapper. It'll wrap it while you continue to bale, and then drop it in the field as an individually wrapped bale. There are other smaller individual bale wrappers that you'll set it on, kind of like a tabletop. It'll turn around, it'll wrap that bale, and then dump it off into a row. This happened to be what they call a tube wrapper. So you just bring the hay off the field to it, set it right on the machine. It's got like a little button on it when you set the bale down that turns the motor on, and it's got a plunger that shoves back, and then two spools of plastic spin around and around in circles, and it just continues to kind of push on the hay and work its way back the line. So as long as you've got flat ground to do it, you can put as many bales in a line as you want. I think there was like 136 in that row of hay in that tube. So, and timeline on that, I started baling at 10 o'clock one morning, and by 6 o'clock that evening, we were done, hay wrapped and everything. I baled, then a neighbor came and sent a couple of his guys, so we had like 4 of us. So we made quite a bit of hay there in a fairly short amount of time. So that part is nice. But anyway, moving on to testing your hay and your protein levels. I think we've already kind of talked about that, as one's finding a lab. And a lot of your local feed stores around, you may be able to talk to them. They may be able to have a lab that they would recommend that you send that hay or forage sample to. And then having your hay tested can increase the value if you choose to sell it. And then it also may save you money in supplemental feeding of your animals throughout the winter time. So a lot of people just insist on feeding grain. They think they have to, but if they've got a good enough quality hay, that may not be necessary. So I don't even say most, pretty much my whole cow herd doesn't see any grain through the winter time, unless I've got heifers that I'm developing and wanting to grow and kind of push. So as far as our cow herd goes, they just get hay or wrapped hay through the winter and seem to maintain a very good body condition throughout. So that's kind of.
Can you tell us one more time, when you're testing it, what is the ideal percentage, or what are you looking for to know that you don't necessarily need to supplement? Is there a goal that you're looking for?
And I'm not, I can't answer that exactly because I don't know all the facts and figures, but I will say your county extension agent probably has a chart or something that they could go off of. So but in general, a brood cow or a mature cow only requires like 8 to 10% maybe 11% protein, crude protein in their diet or hay to maintain. Now, that's not, when she starts lactating or after she has a calf, but as far as just maintaining a body condition, if you have 10, 11% hay, that's probably gonna maintain her. Now, if you've got a first calf heifer or a second calf heifer whose body condition is a little less, maybe going into winter, they may require a better feed or a better quality, as well as heifers that you are developing and what I kind of consider pushing, because you want them to grow, you want to get them developed get to the appropriate weight, for breeding come spring. You may need a better feed quality that way. But just on grass hay around here, 10-11% you can do. It's not always the easiest with some of your orchard grass and alfalfa. You can hit that 20%. I've tested some going with just an orchard grass alfalfa mix, hitting in the 16 to 18% range. And you can't really buy ground feed at 16 to 18%, feed. You don't see much of that even offered. So if that gives you some idea just how good that hay then is, it's you can. And again, I'm not a nutritionist, but if you really want to get into it, there's other resources out there, that you can talk to, and will help you out along those lines as far as supplemental feeding goes.
Yeah, that's a great plug for working with your county extension agent, I think, because each county is going to be different too, based on geography and soil types. And so I think that's a really good piece of advice there.
Okay. And really that wraps it up, on my end. But again, we're open to questions, and I don't know, Lacey, you feel free to share my contact information if anybody has any questions. Again, I'm not an expert. It's just something I really, agriculture has always been definitely a passion of mine, and enjoy doing it. So happy to help anybody out that way, answering questions or equipment questions or timing of when they need to make hay. I guess a perfect situation, one last little plug would be, always a good rule of thumb, if you could be done making hay before June ever rolled around, you've probably got some pretty good hay made, as long as you got it, dried out appropriately and cured. So anyway.
That's great. Well, I feel like I've asked a million questions. So I'll pause for a second before I ask my next one to see if anyone else has a question that's burning. And I did go ahead and put your email there in the chat so that folks can reach out to you directly if they have questions. You've been a wealth of knowledge, so we certainly appreciate it. So a couple of things that are just on my mind. If you're doing this for the first couple of times, and if you're familiar with things like gardening, a lot of our crops you harvest one time and you're done for the season. Other crops you harvest multiple times before you're done for the season. So how does that go when it comes to hay? Are you generally cutting just once and baling and you're done, or do you get multiple cuttings generally? What's ideal when it comes to hay?
No, and that's a perfect question, and some of it's going to depend upon, type of hay, and I also like to tell folks, what do you do on your farm? If you have grazing livestock, I would highly recommend, if you can just make one cutting of hay, and you have fences on it, why in the world would you not use your cattle, your sheep, your goats, whatever, to harvest that second or third cutting of hay? Not waste the diesel fuel and the time and the energy and the equipment of running over that ground when you're extending your grazing and being able to use your livestock. So I know that was a bit of a tangent, but I wanted I feel very, very passionate about doing that, and being able to utilize my hay ground as pasture as well. But for your alfalfas, My second cutting's coming on pretty strong. It'll be ready here in another week or two, probably. So I'll anticipate 4, maybe 5 cuttings of alfalfa this year. Orchard grass, you can expect to, if you get it early, cut early, you can definitely expect 2 to 3 cuttings. And now some of like your summer annuals, Sudan grass, teff grass, you can get about 3 cuttings off those as well, just about every 30 days, and you can cut that kind of stuff. So a lot of, we've got some folks that are just die hard. I'm going to get 3 cuttings of hay no matter what, and they're gonna, you can do it. But again, the more you take off of that ground, the more nutrients you're going to be required to put back on it to keep that production up. That's why I like, ideally, if I can take 1 cutting of hay and then kind of stockpile those fields and graze them later on in the fall or summer, mix them in with our rotation works really well. So. But most generally, 2 cuttings in our area for, just a standard mixed grass hay is very, very common.
Okay, and you also alluded to my other question, which was, can you speak to how someone that is interested in or is practicing rotational grazing, how to weave in or allow for hay cutting on some of your pasture or grazing area? So how do you, and this is probably a much more detailed conversation, but if you can give us the high notes on, when to pull your animals off if you're grazing that land, when to reintroduce them, etc.
Right. No, and I think that's, for the most part, a pretty easy question because you think of the springtime of the year, typically, we've got way more pasture than we actually need. The grass is growing faster than our livestock can keep it, at bay. So my recommendation would be, holding off a paddock or a field, not letting those cattle in at that spring, harvesting it for hay. And another thing I haven't really touched on is a lot of folks like to mow their hay ground, scalp it down to the dirt, mow it just as low as they can and get everything that they possibly can. I try to hold my mowers up about 4 inches at least, and cut it higher because that grass will come back so much quicker. And be able to put it right back into your grazing system. We also have a lot of Johnson grass in our area, and folks, oh, how do you get rid of Johnson grass in a hay field? I'm like, just love it because the cattle do. So, Johnson grass are really warm season grass. Usually don't have it in your first cutting of hay. So, areas like that may have a weed or what people would consider a weed in it. Take that first cutting of hay off, let that Johnson grass come back, put up your temporary fencing or poly wire around that field if you don't already have permanent fencing, and let the cattle or livestock go in there and graze it. So, I think, hay and grazing definitely can go, hand in hand if done appropriately that way.
Awesome.
So I don't know. I'll just skip back. I don't know if you can see, but right there, the picture that you see there, that's a hay field right beside my house that had 1 cutting of hay taken off of it. No, actually, it had two cuttings of hay taken off of it last year, and then I was able to graze it again another 3 or 4 times that fall by just utilizing polywire temporary fencing around it.
Wow, that looks great. Okay, well, I will hold off on any other questions that I have, but this has been super educational. I greatly appreciate it. I know a lot of people are probably out like right now cutting hay or preparing to. So, this I think will be a relevant for a lot of people to tune into and check out on our YouTube channel. So, thanks a lot, Jeremy. We appreciate you and your time tonight. I've got your contacts there in the chat, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Jeremy directly, and we'll try and get you connected with the folks that have the answers specific to your region. So that's it for tonight. It's 6:59, so we will end this call and look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks at our next Homesteading Series webinar. So thanks a bunch, and we'll see you soon. Bye, Jeremy.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.